heroes, hear their groans, feel their highs, feel their moans. Stories untold now on the mic. Mets fans,
Welcome back to the Meet the Mets Fans podcast. I'm your host, Stefan. I'm here with Justin. Justin,
what's up, guys?
We've got some crazy things to talk about right now. Earlier today, Justin and I recorded the episode that you're listening to right now without what we're about to talk to you about. And then I'm at dance with my daughter, Samira, who you guys are going to hear from on this pod. And Justin gives me a phone call with some important breaking news about the New York Mets. Justin, what happened?
Yeah, to be honest with you, at first I wasn't sure if this was real. I see it's from Passan. We mentioned, on this podcast how much Passan is pretty much the number one source for all of baseball. When he says something, it's pretty legit. And this came to fruition and it pretty much transpired pretty quickly. So let me get right to it. It said Brandon Nimmo, fan favorite of the New York Mets, who's been around since 2011, drafted by the New York Mets, has been traded to the Texas Rangers in exchange for second baseman Marcus Semien. Whoa.
I don't even know how to react to that. My reaction is what? Why? How? Why in the world is this trade happening right now? We have so many infield options on our team. Why are we trading for a second baseman and getting rid of a guy who hit 30-plus home runs, who drove in damn near 100 RBIs last year?
I'm stunned. I am totally stunned. I think most Met fans are stunned. They are shocked. Just hearing from like some fans of mine in terms of like Met fans, no one can really explain what's going on right now with all of this. But I think let's get into it a little bit and try to make sense of where Stearns is going with this, and hopefully this obviously is going to help the New York Mets. But this is a stunner, right? It really is a total stunner. All right, let's get down to it. Nimmo's 32 years old. He'll be 33 in March at the beginning of this year. He's got 5 years left, $102 million, right? So he's owed about $20.5 million over the next 5 years. He'll be 38 at the end of this contract. Marcus Semien, a little bit older, very similar in terms of the contract, though. He'll be 30. He's 35 right now. He just turned 35 in September, so he's playing out his 30th year this year. He's got 3 years left and $72 million left, so about $24 million a year. So really, really comparable contracts, pretty much like a wash in terms of like money being exchanged here.
I guess the only non-wash is the fact that Semien will only be on the team for 3 years. So you're committing this money for 3 years versus committing the money to Nimmo for 5 years. And the last time I talked about Brandon Nimmo, I said this guy is somebody that the Mets believed is a core player for them. And it was clear that David Stern said he wanted to shake up the core of this team. I just never thought it was going to be with Brandon Nimmo. Honestly, I believed it. Not that I wanted it, but I thought Pete Alonso was going to be the shakeup. It was the easiest shakeup to make. Just choose not to bring him back. Now, I hope that's not the case. Pete Alonso needs to be a part of this team even more so now. We've just lost significant power on this team, some significant RBI production on this team for a really, really good defensive second baseman. Like, I get it. Semien is a Gold Glover. Brandon Nimmo is not a great left fielder. We've talked about his ability to play the field, talked about him potentially DHing more to get him off his legs. I'm just shocked. This guy's a guy that when I look at him play the game of baseball, I say that's the way I would want my kids to grow up playing the game. He plays hard. He's passionate. He runs everything out. How do we trade this guy off our team? I just can't get over it.
I know. Yeah, he's been in his organization since 2011, right? We drafted him. We saw him coming up as a kid. He was obviously one of our top picks, right, in 2011. A guy that took a little bit of time, though, to develop. And I think that's what Met fans loved, is that they saw this progression and this growth from this guy. Someone that went from really like an on-base guy, walk guy, working the count to, as you mentioned before, a power hitter, right? So that knocked in 92 RBIs last year, hit over 30 home runs, had it over 800 OPS. And so, it's pretty surprising. And it's definitely a significant drop offensively with Semien. Now, Semien played 127 games last year, right, due to a broken foot. Okay, and so he fractured his foot. He fouled the ball off, and that's caused this injury. So he missed the remainder of this year. He got injured in August and essentially went on the 60-day IL. With that, though, he was 15 home runs, batting .220, 108 hits. Definitely, as we mentioned before, definitely a downgrade in terms of offensively. But yes, he won the Gold Glove, and Stearns has mentioned up the middle defense. Okay, that is something that he has stressed, something that he wants, something that he values. And I guess now when you have Lindor and now Semien up the middle defensively, right on the infield, I guess that's pretty good.
Yeah. What does it mean that's gonna happen now for this team? This guy's a 220 hitter. Like not just power offensively that we're losing on this team. We're losing a contact hitter. Brandon Nimmo batted 260 for the Mets last year, and we know he has the ability to be a great contact hitter. Marcus Semien, the last time he batted over 260, he batted 276 in 2023. But his batting averages have been just above or just at 250, 248, 265, 223. Right? This is a defense first player, and Stearns said, I'm looking to improve the defense of his team. He's definitely done that, but what are you doing now with all of these middle infield options that the Mets have? Your Ronnie Mauricio's, your Jet Williams, right? Like, he did not commit to Jet Williams in any way, shape, or form when he talked about him, and maybe this is the reason why.
Yeah, I got to say, there's a couple of things here, right, that we need to address. The first thing is that obviously Semien is a right-hand hitter, and so I don't want to lose Pete. Right, we can't lose Pete, right? Especially now after losing Nimmo. But now it does give us another right-handed hitter to kind of balance out that lineup. And when you look at the offseason and you look at the free agents that are available, you got Schwarber, left-handed hitter. Tucker, left-handed hitter. Morikawa, left-handed hitter. Bellinger, left-handed hitter. So the guys that are available, that are those big power bats, are all left-handed hitters. And I think it's something that we addressed earlier in one of the podcasts, and we talked about how none of these guys really fit because the Mets are so heavy left-handed. Now with Nimmo not being there, I mean, this does kind of change or can change the outlook of this potential lineup and the potential impending free agents here.
Yeah, but you got to go get one of these guys now, right? Like that's got to be the move. You can't look at us Met fans in the face, David Stearns, and make this trade and then not respond with an immediate move. I don't want to sit around waiting for the next 2 to 3 weeks to find out who the Brandon Nimmo replacement is. And honestly, like we all kind of said, we disliked Sid's offseason plan of Kyle Tucker, but maybe this is the plan. And forget Cody Bellinger at this point. Go get me Kyle Tucker. We should have been looking to get Cody Bellinger with Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso on this team. I was all about Cody Bellinger when we had Brandon Nimmo. Now we don't have Brandon Nimmo, and I want Kyle Tucker. You're telling me that we're trading away this much offensive production for our defense? Get me Kyle Tucker, stick him in left field, and we've got a legit outfield at that point. We've got to make a move here, David Stearns. You've got to look Met fans in the face and tell us that we are getting better. Last year, and Justin, we talked about this in your first episode on the pod, last year the Mets had a worse offensive year than the year prior. And you've just taken away one of our biggest offensive pieces. You haven't replaced Pete Alonso yet. I don't know what we're doing here with Marcus Semien.
Yeah, it's scary to think that you have an outfield that starts with Juan Soto, and you have real major question marks now in center field and now in left field. And what is that outfield actually going to now look like? You know, I don't know how you fill left field, right, with what's currently on the New York Mets. As you mentioned before, I don't think it exists. I think it's someone that has got to be outside this organization. I think it's going to have to be, as you mentioned, a Bellinger, right? I'll take a Tucker at this point. But I don't see how you go into this season with a potential rookie center fielder in Benj, right? And then a question mark in left field. I don't know where this comes from. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how he's going to orchestrate this, but it's got to be coming from the outside here. It has to be an outside free agent that they're going to be bringing in.
Yeah, well, we just locked up second base, right? So it's like, what are the locks on this team? First base is a question mark. Second base is a lock. It's now Marcus Semien. Shortstop, obviously, is Lindor. I'm assuming Brett Beatty is our third baseman, right? He's got to be unless he gets traded here. But so your Mark Vientos, where is he playing? Probably getting traded. Mauricio probably getting traded. And Acuna, what's he playing at this point?
What about McNeil, right? That's the big guy here that's most impacted, right? David Stearns came out and said he is not going to play a lot of center field this year. You just traded now for a second baseman. Jeff McNeil is not going to be on the New York Mets in 2026. There's just no way. He came out and flat out said he's not playing center field. You just got Semien. Where does this guy go?
He better not be the DH, right? Like there's got to be subsequent moves here, and we've got to know what the plan is moving forward. I don't know where we go from here. I feel like at some point we've got to draw up the board, Justin. We've got to start making the 26-man roster and trying to fill out these spots.
Yeah, I'm with you. David Stearns in his press conference talked a little bit about being landlocked, right? In terms of like big contracts, right? And obviously you have the Soto big contract, you have Lindor big contract, and then you had the Nimmo, which was a big contract in terms of the length of years, and maybe for the New York Mets, they viewed this as, we know it's a slight downgrade offensively. It helps our defense, but it also eliminates some of the years that we are committing to these guys in terms of their contracts. And so maybe that allows them now to go out and sign a guy a 5-6 year contract without feeling like they're landlocked, as David Stern said it earlier this offseason in his press conference.
They must believe that Brandon Nimmo's breaking down, because Brandon Nimmo's contract, while long, 5 years, and what's it going to look like in 5 years, I don't know, is about $20 million a year. It's not bad. Trent Grisham is getting $22.5 million for his qualifying offer this year. If you're telling me to compare Trent Grisham to Brandon Nimmo, I take Brandon Nimmo a million times over. He's making more money than Brandon Nimmo is going to make on this contract. That $20 million contract is not terrible. Granted, it is for 5 years. I just think he's going to produce at least for the next 3 years of that contract. And maybe Stearns just feels like I don't want to know what it's going to look like in years 4 and year 5. We don't believe he's going to hold up, and we believe we've got to move on from him.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Ottavino came out. He made some comments about Nimmo and him, raising his eyebrows as Lindor being the captain potentially. Maybe this is real, right? Maybe there was some tension going on in that clubhouse, because you don't just trade this guy unless there's a major issue, right? Or there's some grumblings that were happening, right? Or some problems that were happening in the clubhouse. He was a huge fan favorite, as we kind of earlier previously mentioned, is that you want your son to grow up playing like Brandon Nimmo.
We're going to hear from some of you guys, Met fans, that have reached out to us already, that have shared some videos, some audio, and some of your comments about this trade taking place.
Yeah, as you pull that up, I'll tell you, man, this is going to be a wild offseason. Okay, I think there's going to be a lot of changes to this roster. I know that a lot of analysts have reported on this. There's been a lot of speculation going on in terms of there's going to be some major shakeups. This is a major shakeup. A guy who has been a core player for the New York Mets, gone. Major shakeup.
Huge. All right, here we go. So from Pinman, who was part of episode 4, immediately responded, "I just can't figure this one out. I keep scratching my head. It makes no sense. Bringing in a 35-year-old with 3 years on his contract, who was a 220 hitter last year with 15 home runs, I just don't get it. Brandon was the heart and soul of the Mets." That's from Superfan, the Pinman. I got another comment from Ralph Prov. Ralph says, "This trade is terrible. Stearns is a boy in a man's world right now." And then tagged the Mets to that. And then Pinman actually commented on what he said, "If I scratch my head anymore, I'm going to bleed. I just don't get this at all."
Pinman, don't go down like that.
I think this is going to be the response of a lot of different Met fans. It's going to be hard to see a guy that people love no longer a part of this team and say Marcus Semien is the guy replacing him. Marcus Semien has got an uphill battle, I'll tell you that much. He better come out swinging.
Pun intended.
Before we wrap up our State of the Mets, we are going to hear from a few more fans. This next one is actually my daughter, who is a huge Brandon Nimmo fan. Her name is Samira. Let's hear what Samira has to say, 6-year-old, about Brandon Nimmo getting traded. Samira, who's your favorite Mets player?
Brandon Nimmo. I am so sad that he left.
He left? He didn't leave. The Mets got rid of him. How do you feel about that?
I feel so sad that the Mets got rid of him.
They got another player, a second baseman. His name is Marcus Semien. Are you going to like him?
No.
You're going to...
I'm not going to get used to Marcus Semien until July.
You're not going to get used to Marcus Semien until July?
Yep.
All right, so you think by July you'll like him?
Maybe.
Are you going to miss Brandon Nimmo?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Our next clip here is going to be from Anthony E., telling us how he feels about the Brandon Nimmo trade. Take it away, Anthony.
All right. The Mets have traded Brandon Nimmo for Marcus Semien of the Texas Rangers. Apparently, just under an hour ago, Brandon Nimmo waived his no-trade clause to honor the trade, and he is now a Ranger. We just lost a player who absolutely deserved to be a lifelong Met. Gave everything he has had for this team. The 2024 postseason was more than enough proof that man will do anything for his team, playing with the foot injury that he had and still having a fantastic end of that year and one of his best offensively producing years in 2024 and 2025. While at the same time, Marcus Semien had 2 of his worst years offensively. David Stern, you prove to us time and time again that you have no finger on the pulse of this team. You don't understand that chemistry is one of the most important things a baseball team needs in a clubhouse, or what everybody else is starting to believe as well. You just don't give a damn, and you are going all in on this Moneyball theory. Juan Soto aside, Moneyball isn't going to bring a ring to Flushing. And I'm really starting to think that David Stern is never going to bring a ring to Flushing.
Our next reaction is from another huge Met fan, Kyle. Kyle, take it away. How are you feeling about this trade?
You know, there really isn't much left to say, and the fact that this is a huge loss in Metland. Brandon Nimmo was the consummate gentleman in the clubhouse, always a fan favorite. I remember meeting him several times throughout his career as a Met, you know, pictures, autographs, everything of the sort. And this is going to be a huge hole to fill. I'm going to be, you know, I'm devastated. But, you know, if it's for the better of the team, it's what it is.
Thanks, Kyle. We appreciate hearing from you. And Kyle is one of those fans that we hope to get onto the pod soon to do an episode with us. The invite's out there, Kyle. You let me know when you're ready to do this. And our next one is actually just going to be an audio recording from our buddy G, Top Flight. Top Flight. What's your response to the Brandon Nimmo trade?
If this trade can get us Scooble, can get us Sandy, can get us that boy Tucker, this opens up the door. Because now we know Acuna's got to go. Is Tucker willing to play left field? We don't know. This was an in-house move. It's something behind this. Maybe those rumors that came out about Brandon are true, but there's definitely going to have to be some explanation for this move.
Next Mets fan we're going to hear from is Christina, who was out with her family doing what all of us were doing on a Sunday night as we got this information that Brandon Nimmo's been traded. Christina, what was your reaction when you heard the news?
So my son was in basketball just now. I don't know. Do they know what they're doing? Trading somebody like Nimmo for a big name like that? Because Nimmo just has so much heart and so much heart. He brings so much every single day. And this is just heartbreaking. I don't know. A second baseman, okay, Marcus, what's his name? Semien? I don't know his name. And I say it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt to see Brandon Nimmo on the Texas Rangers. It's going to hurt. And I don't know. Do they know what they're doing? I don't know.
And there you have it, Met fans. That's exactly what we mean to do here on Meet the Mets fans. We want to bring the reaction of fans to our team. You've heard how fans feel. This is the state of the Mets right here. This is how we are feeling in response to David Stearns and the New York Mets making a huge shakeup of our team. A lot of negativity coming out of there, but maybe there's some bright side that we'll be looking forward to in the future. Tough day for the Met fans, tough day for myself losing Brandon Nimmo. But we do have other things that we want to get to here on Meet the Mets fans. Justin and I are going to take you guys through some of the other headlines that have been surrounding the Mets. Not to take it away, Joss.
Oh, yeah. So we know that the offseason is something that, you know, it's like the baseball season. It's long, it's drawn out, but it's what we love, right? Like I can't, I'm tuned in every single second. I'm just Googling New York Mets, right? For no reason. My wife's like, what are you doing on your phone, right? And I'm like, nothing. I don't know. And so, you know, there's been some major things. And I think that, you know, this past Friday was a big deadline for the non-tender players. And so we're going to start with the New York Mets designating for assignment, Frankie Montas. See ya later. Right? I think every single Met fan listening to that name, right, they kind of cringe a little bit. Even when that contract came out, that 2 years, $34 million last year, and it was early in the offseason, we kind of, my eyebrows just raised right now. And I know that my eyebrows are still raised thinking about Frankie Montas, okay? And so, you know, I don't want to say I'm happy to see him go, but it just didn't work out here. And obviously he was going to miss the entirety of that 2026 season coming up, you know, and so, yeah, he's gone. All right. And I think that's what Steve Cohen and Stearns have done really nicely is say, this isn't working. We need to get rid of this person and we need to move on. And I think they've done a really nice job with that. And here's another example of cutting a major contract that's $17 million upcoming this year. With Frankie Montas.
Yeah, I am happy to see him go, right? I know, like, I was happy to see him go from the second that this guy got added to the roster. It was a huge mistake. I thought when that contract came out, I cannot believe that this guy's getting this kind of money from the Mets. That contract aged terribly, as I think almost every Met fan thought it would. It's unbelievable to me that someone who is as smart as David Stearns would give Frankie Montas that kind of money. But I think it's an amazing thing that we have an owner that's willing to cut his losses monetarily and say, it's more important to us to have this roster spot than to have this guy sitting on the 40-man roster And the Mets are essentially saying our prospects are way more important than clogging up a roster spot.
Yeah, and I think it's nice having an owner that has a gold toilet that can sell for over $12 million. That's essentially going to be paying for Frankie Montas after insurance is going to kick in, hopefully, right, for the rest of that contract. So, yeah, thank you, that gold toilet, and thank you, Frankie Montas. Right, not that I'm saying that you are like a toilet, but it's pretty similar, right? So I think it goes pretty well over here. Speaking of those roster spots that you were just talking about, I think with Frankie Montas, obviously you have the 40-man roster. What that means is that you obviously have 40 players that are protected. And after a player's fourth and fifth year, depending on when they were signed, if they were signed before 18, it's year 5. Is after 18, it's year 4. A player, their number 16 prospect, Nick Morabito, was up for potentially for a Rule 5 draft. And so they were able to protect him by dropping or designate for assignment Frankie Montas. And I think that was the big deal, right? And that's why that news kind of came out at that time.
There are a couple of players, though, that the Mets did not protect the way they protected Morabito. Kevin Parada, who was a big-time catching prospect for a long time for the Mets, right? When we think about Francisco Alvarez, the guy that was standing next to Francisco Alvarez in their minor league time together was Kevin Parada, and everybody thought Parada was going to become this huge major league player. He didn't work out. Injuries and whatnot kept him down in the minor leagues. And the Mets essentially...
He was a first-round pick for the Mets, right? Like, this guy was legit or supposed to be legit. Like, he wasn't just like some Joe Schmo. He was a first-round pick for the New York Mets.
Yeah, I remember them talking on Sports Talk Radio last year when Alvarez got injured and Terens was doing all the catching. They said, isn't this the perfect time to bring up Kevin Parada? He's toiling away in the minor leagues. Let's bring this guy up here and give him a shot. And essentially, everyone pretty much thought, like, he's still not ready. And if he's still not ready, the Mets absolutely made a right move here, not giving this guy a contract and letting him subject himself to the Rule 5 draft. So we'll see if he gets drafted by somebody, ends up not being on the Mets. And then another guy that I actually think is very shocking that the Mets did not protect is Adbert Alzolay, right? So this is a guy that the Mets signed last year, had a really, really good season 2 years ago for the Cubs. And I think that
he was a closer for a good portion of that year.
Yeah, and he got injured. The Mets brought him on thinking this is going to be like a one-and-one type of deal. He'll sit out for a year and then be available the next year. I remember thinking about the Mets bullpen coming into this year and saying this guy's going to be a part of it. And the Mets essentially are going to let him enter the Rule 5 draft.
Yeah, so what does that mean, right? So essentially the Mets thinking here is that a team hopefully is not going to draft him. When you draft a player from a Rule 5 draft, it essentially means that you need to activate that player on your 26-man roster for the duration of that season, granted injury, right? Obviously, if a player gets injured, right, you can put him on the IL. But essentially, if a team does draft him in their Rule 5 draft, he's got to be an active member of their 26-man roster. And so, I guess the Mets thinking is, hey, let's take a shot at this, right? And then we can then use this guy and put him in the minor leagues. Otherwise, he would, again, have to be added to their 26-man roster. We'll see if it works out with Stearns. They're kind of gambling over here. He's an interesting player, though. Someone that I really thought was kind of going to be bookmarked for this bullpen, especially when you're looking at like who the Mets actually have currently in their bullpen. I'm not kidding when I say it's AJ Minter and then Brooks Raley. There's not much else right now in terms of actual guys that are shoo-ins that are going to be penciled into the Mets bullpen. And I really thought Alzolay was going to be one of those guys. I know he's already pitching in the Winter League. So, we'll see. Hopefully this works out for the Mets.
Yeah, I think worst case scenario, he gets drafted to another team. If that team, for whatever reason, doesn't keep him on the major league roster the entire year, he goes back to the Mets. And so the Mets at that point would be able to put him on their team, keep him in AAA. I think that the problem with that gamble is if that other team who drafts him decides he's not doing well enough to keep at the major league level, why would we want him at the major league level? So we'll see what ends up happening with Alzolay. Other DFA guys, Danny Young, no longer a New York Met, not going to be here next year. And then Max Kranick, who had a great start of the year for us last year, started to come back to earth a little bit and then it got injured and was out for the rest of the year.
Yeah, well, again, both of those guys you just mentioned are pretty much going to be out for the entirety of that 2026 season. And specifically with Tommy John surgery, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that whole thing of going on with this Tommy John surgery and Mets bullpen arms and whether or not it's the Mets to blame, right? There is some comments that were made that we're going to get to in just a moment. We also got Tyrone Taylor, right, which I think was, I don't want to say it was a no-brainer. There were some rumblings that potentially Tyrone Taylor is not going to be signed. They avoided arbitration with him, right? $3.8 million. At this point, Taylor is our starting center fielder, right? I think it was a no-brainer to sign this guy. Stearns loves him. I'm not gonna lie, he's obviously a really good defender. He's someone that, do I want to be starting as our center fielder? Not sure, but I think he's a great fourth outfielder. Obviously, we saw some injuries last year, and Taylor kind of stepped in, and he was someone by the end of the year, we're like, please give us Taylor. I don't want to see Jose Siri ever again in a New York Mets uniform. Okay. And so I think Taylor's a guy that 100% you keep. I think it was a no-brainer. I think Stern said it was a no-brainer. I think it was just a formality at that point. So nice job on the Mets there.
Yeah, nice job to avoid arbitration and not make it contentious as to what he's worth. Glad Tyrone and the Mets can agree that $3.8 million is a fair contract for a guy who we hope is our fourth outfielder by the end of the year. But if this guy played every single day in center field, he'd win the Gold Glove. I hope we never get to find out, because I hope that there's a better offensive player who's coming in and taking that spot. And really, I believe that guy's going to be Carson Bench. And David Stern says as much. In our last episode, we talked about that. Stern's pretty much opening the door for Bench to take that job right out of spring training. And if he's not ready right out of spring training, I love Tyrone Taylor batting 9 and playing a hell of a center field.
Yeah, we got to get to these scathing comments by Adam Ottavino, right? A former New York Met. And we're not talking like a guy from like the 90s. We're talking about a guy who was on our roster in 2024. And a guy that actually played for Carlos Mendoza. So here's the quote. This is embarrassing. This is actually pathetic, like pathetic. I would never let this happen if I was on the team last year, he said. At least half of these guys wouldn't have blown out. I would have protected these dudes myself. I would have had to jump in front of them myself. It's a quote from Adam Ottavino. What are your thoughts?
Adam Ottavino is calling out the New York Mets and Carlos Mendoza for the way they handled these guys. And I don't know. He brings up a good point. There was a lot of guys who ended up going down this year with Tommy John surgery that played for the New York Mets. And I don't know that the Mets protocols are the reason for why that's happening. But when you have your starting pitchers that can't throw more than 5 innings, 6 innings tops, and the bullpen was taxed, I think we all saw that as fans. We watched our bullpen every single day go out there and try to pitch more innings than our starting pitchers were pitching. Of course, these guys broke down, right? And you know, I don't think Carlos Mendoza is trying to injure players. I don't believe that that's what he's trying to do there. But a lot of these guys are now injured on Tommy John and not playing this year. McGill, Adendale Nunez, Danny Young, Frankie Montas, Reed Garrick, Max Kranick, all of these guys in the same season get injured and have to have Tommy John surgery.
Yeah, and these are all bullpen guys, right? And so, like, if we're thinking about, like, whether the bullpen was taxed, it was pretty clear. Now, you know, Stearns kind of made a comment that he talked about, yeah, like, obviously we're going to be picking up some bullpen guys, but he also really emphasized a long man. Right, and I think that is something that the Mets were missing this past year in 2025 was a true long man, someone that can kind of come in and can eat up innings. Starter goes down early. Starter just doesn't have it. We saw that with Peterson a lot towards the end of the year. And this is a guy that might be able to step in and throw 4 or 5 innings. And so, you know, the Mets set a record, right? There was 46 different pitchers were used this past season. They called it like the Syracuse shuttle or shuffle, right? Where there was all these guys coming from Syracuse going up and down, refortifying the Mets bullpen and refortifying this pitching staff, whether it was because of injuries, whether it's because of a lack of performance, or whether or not it was just a need at that point. But it's definitely an issue. I'm with you on the Mendoza not obviously trying to hurt guys, but maybe a little, I don't want to say mismanagement, but a point of, hey, a guy just threw yesterday, or a guy just threw 2 days ago, right? Maybe we shouldn't be on this every other day or every day type of slew here. We might need to, you know, dial back and give these guys a couple of days rest.
Yeah, I think the Mets have made a decision that what they did last year with our starting rotation had a huge impact on the bullpen as something they're not looking to repeat. Obviously, those are words, right? We'll see what ends up happening in free agency, but the Mets need to go out there. The way to protect the bullpen is to get starters who can throw innings. Right, and the Mets need to go out there and add starters to this rotation who could throw innings. Right now, our starting rotation are not filled with guys who can throw innings. The guys who can throw innings are David Peterson, period, stop. Right, and Nolan McLean, like we hope. Right, I love Nolan McLean. I hope that he's the ace that we've been waiting for since Jacob deGrom. But that was a very small sample size. If you get 3 guys that can go out there on a regular basis and throw 7 innings versus one guy in your starting rotation last year that can go out there and throw 7 innings, you're in a much better place. And that one guy clearly broke down by the end of the year. David Peterson did not have it. He had no more left in the tank because he was a really, really good pitcher for us for the vast majority of the year. And then he was somebody we couldn't even put on a mound by the end of the year.
Yeah, you know, wasn't coincidence. I don't believe the innings that he threw David Peterson last year are by far the most that he's had in a major league season, or really a season that he's ever had. And the point in which we saw that collapse was right around the point in which that was the most amount of innings that he threw. It was right around that 133, 135 inning mark. He obviously surpassed that, but we saw his effectiveness just significantly drop right after that mark. And so, the hope is, obviously, we all think that David Peterson is pretty talented. The hope is that he obviously, gets past that. He obviously threw 160 plus innings this year. But again, like you said, it's clear the New York Mets need to address the starting pitching, and they will, right? I am confident. I know that Stearns has already talked about it. It's already been an emphasis. Everyone is talking about it, right? If you're talking about the New York Mets, is a need for a starting pitching, and not just a starting pitching, like a top tier starting pitcher that can be a workhorse for you, right? That is going to go out there, that is going to give you 30 plus starts, that's going to throw you 6+ innings on a daily basis, because the New York Mets just didn't have that. David Peterson at one point was pretty much the only pitcher that could throw 6 innings. And I'm not talking like complete games here. I'm talking just a quality start. The Mets had pitchers that pitched to low ERAs, such as Clay Holmes, but that guy was throwing 4 or 5 innings. And that now is just taxing on your bullpen. And so, I'm not the biggest fan of Adam Ottavino, right? I thought he had a good, year a couple of years ago. These comments are pretty typical of Adam Ottavino. He's someone that was a little contentious in terms of clubhouse guys. But, to go out there and to try to say that Mendoza or the New York Mets are trying to purposely hurt guys, that's not really, that's bad reporting right there, right, by this guy. He's just trying to get some headlines.
Yeah, he that's clickbait stuff by Adam Ottavino on that one, and clearly things didn't end well for Adam Ottavino when it comes to the New York Mets. So take a lot of that with a grain of salt. There's some truth and value to what he's saying about guys being overtaxed, but this is also coming from a guy who the Mets ultimately decided, you're a mop-up guy at this point in your career. We're not going to put you out on a mound because we don't trust you. And then he's no longer part of the team and makes these types of comments. Little negative coming from him for sure. And definitely throwing Mendoza's name into it, not great. But, we talked about the Mets rotation. There's a lot of starting pitchers on the New York Mets right now, when you think about guys that could be pitching at the major league level. So if the Mets are adding starting pitchers, they also have to lose starting pitchers, right? We've got Nolan McLean. We're pretty much saying he's a lock for our major league rotation. You got Sproat and Tong, could start the year in AAA. Sproat could be a major leaguer. Tong probably starting in AAA. You've got Clay Holmes. You got David Peterson, Christian Scott, Sean Manaea, right? It's more than 5, more than 6 guys that are already on this team. So if the Mets are going to add a top of the rotation starting arm and hopefully another guy along with them, they're going to have to make some moves. And maybe those moves are, we can start our younger players in AAA, but there seems to be a lot of talk going around the league about Kodai Senga being a real candidate to be traded.
Yeah, and he's a player in which a lot of executives around the league are saying they have interest in. We saw Kodai Senga at the first half of this year pitch to an under a 2 ERA. He was up for, if you're talking about Cy Young, he was right there in terms of conversation. He obviously gets injured on a Pete Alonso throw, right? Which, that is something we discussed earlier in episodes. But he gets injured, and Senga, again, just never was the same. But I think the potential is there for Senga. Now, obviously, it's a little frustrating with the 6-man rotation. I think that is something in which the New York Mets catered to him. All of last offseason, all we heard was the New York Mets are going to be into a 6-man rotation. Kodai Senga is someone that we care about, is someone that we're going to cater to. They built their rotation around Kodai Senga last year. He was being visited, right, by team officials in Japan. He said that coming into the season, he was healthy, and he looked good. Right? There's no argument there. He came out and he was one of the best pitchers, not just in the NL. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball. The problem is he's not reliable. And I think the New York Mets have too much unreliable pitchers, right now for them. And I think Senga might be on the trade block over here. I really do.
If they can get something quality for him, then I don't see why not look to move on from Kodai Senga. He's another one of those guys that could not pitch a lot of innings. And so, yeah, he was in that talk of like, this guy's pitching like a Cy Young candidate. He was just never gonna win that because he was never gonna qualify for the number of innings you need. And then once he got injured, it was pretty much a lock. There was no shot he had because of the amount of innings that you need to qualify. Kodai Senga, when it comes to his injury history, is unreliable. But when it comes to being a top of the rotation starter, to me, that means you're a guy that can go out there and throw beyond a quality start. You can throw 7 innings. You can throw 8 innings. He's never going to be that guy. If you're telling me Kodai Senga is coming into the Mets rotation this year as the 6th starter, okay, good, fine, great. 5th starter, fine. He's a guy, though, that needs to be paired with somebody else, and maybe that's what the plan is, right? If they don't end up trading him, doing the tag team thing that they did at the end of the year to get through the year could be a way to have maybe a 5-man rotation or a 6-man rotation where Kodai Senga is paired with a Clay Holmes, another guy who throws really well for 5 innings. And so
Or Sean Manaea. We saw that at the end of last year, right? That Sean Manaea was being tag teamed with Clay Holmes. That's another guy that possibly can be jumped into the bullpen over there.
you're just locking up a lot of roster spots with guys that are going to pitch every 4 days, right? So you're saying you're going to have 5 real starters plus 2 guys that are coming in that are also starters that are gonna tag team. It's a lot to lock up with. Maybe you can do that with 1 pair and try to say, who are these guys in our rotation that we know are either going to get injured or they're going to get hurt, or they're going to be non-effective by the end of the year if we have them throwing 6 innings when they're not capable of throwing 6 innings.
Yeah, I think it only works if you have starters that can go deep. I'm with you. That tag team is nice. It potentially gives you like a bullpen day of a rest. But then that guy now, that when you just tag team with him, that guy's not pitching potentially for 4 more days. And so if you only got 13 pitchers and you're using 6 starters, which means that you now have 7 guys in the bullpen, and now one of those guys is going to only be able to throw every 4 days, I don't think the math adds up there. Right? Unless you got starters that are going to give you that depth. And currently, right now, on the Mets roster, we don't have that depth. And so I think that Kodai Senga is a guy, if there is some interest in there, personally, I would be pairing him up in a trade for one of those big-time starting pitchers. I think that's where he has the most amount of value, is a team that's looking to still contend. Obviously, Kodai Senga is a major league pitcher. But for whatever reasons, those guys are getting rid of those top-tier pitchers, whether it's because they're up for a contract next year or there's some disputes on contracts. But I think Kodai Senga is a guy, personally, in terms of its value, can kind of be put into a trade with additional prospects for one of those big-time starting pitchers.
Yeah, for sure, Justin. Let's move now to our group chat headline segment. I put together a list of these screenshots from our group chat. I'm going to put them up on the screen, and we're going to react to these. So, first headline, Justin, the Mets have interest in signing Devin Williams. The Mets are mulling the opportunity to sign Diaz and Williams to head up the bullpen if needed. This is from Jeff Passan. What do you think?
That's spicy. I'm going to be honest. First off, Jeff Passan, I personally think, is the best baseball reporter that we have here. When he sends out a tweet or he sends out an ESPN article, it's good reporting. It's not just this clickbait that we just talked about with Adam Ottavino. This guy is legit. When he puts out something, it's because he's heard rumblings. This isn't just opinion-based. This is something in which he's done reporting on. And the fact that the New York Mets are potentially showing interest in not just signing our boy Diaz, but also pairing him with Devin Williams, that's too tantalizing, right? I almost might be disappointed if the Mets don't do this now, because it's too good to be true. Is it possible? I think that's the next question over here, right? The New York Mets, obviously, their priority 1 and 1A are Diaz and Alonso. And so if we can get Diaz locked up, to get us an 8th inning guy, in which Devin Williams, we saw last year, he struggled in New York early. He was taken out of the closer role. And then he was put into the 8th inning, in which he was successful. And that's not always the case with closers. We saw that obviously with Ryan Helsley. That was a big warning sign for the New York Mets, was that they were going to be trading for a guy who was a closer, very routine guy, and put him into the 8th inning or just a different role, and he struggled with that. We saw Devin Williams, he struggled in New York early, he got taken out of the closer role, but then he put into the 8th inning, which this might be the role for him, and he was very successful. Now, I think in order for this to happen, this isn't going to be a situation where you could just give this guy, a 1-year, $5 million contract. You're going to have to pay the man. You have to pay the man like he's a closer, because you're asking him now to take on a different role, a role that's usually financially less than a closer. But man, if you compare these two up, that is too good to be true, to be honest with you.
And honestly, if the Mets want some leverage with Diaz, which I really wish we weren't in this spot with Diaz. The Mets should have signed Diaz during the window where they were the only ones allowed to negotiate with him. We're not there anymore. But if you want leverage with Diaz and you sign Devin Williams and say, Edwin, listen, we love you. We want you back. We want you to be the closer of the New York Mets, but we are also not going to overpay at this point because we've got a closer. Maybe you put a little bit of pressure. It's clear that Diaz wants to be back with the Mets, but Diaz also very specifically said, I got to do what's right for my family. The Mets need to pay Diaz. They need to give him the money that he wants, make him the highest paid closer of all time, which he already was, expand that contract, make sure that he gets what he wants. But I also love the signing of Devin Williams. That would be great. He may not have pitched well in New York to start, but he did pitch well in New York at some point. We know that he's got what it takes to be here, and the pressure would be off coming in and being number 2 to Edwin Diaz rather than coming into the New York Yankees and expecting to be the number 1.
Yeah, give me a headline that says the New York Mets signed Diaz and Devin Williams, not just a potential.
Yeah, we'll see. Next one, the Mets coaching staff update. We talked a little bit about the guys that left and the guys that are back.
They added, what they're doing now is they're having multiple hitting and multiple pitching coaches now. And so it seems like it's going to be kind of a joint decision, which is interesting to hear because early in the offseason, Eric Chavez, who was our former hitting coach, went out and did an interview, right, and discussed like his tenure with the New York Mets. And one of the things he talked about was the fact that he had an assistant that worked under him, a guy that was in the minor leagues with the New York Mets, and a guy that a lot of those hitters and a lot of those players kind of came up in the system with. And he talked about how he would never do that again. He would never have an assistant that was that closely tied to players. Clearly, there was a disagreement, right, in terms of their philosophy, where there was some players listening to that assistant, some players not listening to that assistant, some players listening to Chavez, and some not. And so it's interesting to see that they took what Chavez said, fired him, and then said, we're going to do exactly what he said he would never do again, which is essentially put in a couple of hitting coaches and a couple of pitching coaches. And I think just, more heads, more brain power, right? Why not? Get as much information as you possibly can.
I think, though, that the difference here in what the Mets have done this year is there's a clear leader of the hitting staff, right? And I think, so Eric Chavez was the Mets bench coach 2 years ago. Last year, the Mets moved him back to his hitting coach roles. He spent a year, he was the hitting coach, then he went to being Carlos Mendoza's bench coach. Then the Mets last year moved him back to being the hitting coach. And when they did that, they had 2 guys that essentially were equal in their leadership of the hitting staff. And it's very clear based on the titles here that Jeff Albert is the director. He's the guy in charge of the Major League hitting squad. And then you've got Troy Snitker, who's been a hitting coach, a professional hitting coach at a very high level for the Giants, who's under him. And I think they've made that clear that Albert's leading the show. Troy Snitker is there right underneath him. And then they also have an assistant hitting coach, Rafael Fernandez, who's now underneath Troy Snitker. So this is essentially a department of guys that are coming together to lead the hitting staff. And maybe some guys will have better relationships with other guys, but the hitting philosophy is coming from Jeff Albert. He's the director. And then the other major piece here is Gilbert Gomez. Gilbert Gomez is the guy replacing our first base coach. He's first base outfield coach. And there was a lot made of the first base coach leaving the Mets, right? Like, we lost Anton Richardson. We've got Gilbert Gomez taking over in that role. Gomez was the Double-A manager. Now he's taking over as the Major League first base outfield coach. Thoughts on that?
I got to say, man, I heard Juan Soto coming out. He had an interview. He talked about losing Anton Richardson. He was not happy about that. It was pretty clear. He had a pretty good relationship with him. Juan Soto was the leader in the National League for stolen bases. I feel like that was a misprint when I read that, but that's legit. And they let this guy walk, Anton Richardson. I heard, some rumblings. I know that, there was the pension stuff. I heard that he wanted money, and I heard that some of the issues with that was that the Mets felt as such that as a first base coach, the money that he was asking for would be insulting to the other coaches in terms of them not getting as much or nearly as much, and Richardson being a first base coach getting way more money than the rest of the coaches that they had there. And that was one of the hurdles that they faced early on in terms of the negotiations. But still, one that is, I think it's a real miss for the Mets. I really do. We'll see what this guy can do. I'm not saying he's going to be bad for the Mets. It's just, again, when you have someone that was so successful, really, in terms of like what's the pros of the 2025 New York Mets, it was their success on the base pass, right? And I don't think anyone can argue that.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Anton Richardson was great. It's obvious that he had an impact. However, he's just a first base coach, right? He didn't teach Juan Soto how to steal bases, and then Juan forgot, right? Like, he educated our hitters on the base paths, on good jumps, and helped them to get those good jumps. I think that his replacement could have an even bigger impact because of the next screenshot I'm going to put up here. This is a photo of Juan Soto with our new first base coach for one of the Dominican teams, Licey. So this is from Master Flip on Twitter and Hector Gomez. Per Juan Soto, he has a verbal agreement with Steve Cohen that allows him 10 LIDOM, and that is the Dominican League games, for Licey during his contract with the Mets. The manager of Licey is the newly appointed first base coach, Gilbert Gomez. Contrary to reports, Anton Richardson's departure is going to enhance Juan Soto's presence in the clubhouse. So Juan Soto has a guy that he is comfortable with from the Dominican that is now on this team. And I think that's really, really important. I think a lot was made of Juan last year, not really feeling comfortable, not really feeling like the Mets are his team. I talked about this in the last pod about Juan Soto stepping up and kind of glazing Pete Alonso a little bit with his comments. And to me, that felt really good because he's taking ownership of this team. And I think this is another way that Juan is going to feel comfortable in that dugout, is having a guy that he trusts, replacing the guy that I think he gave a lot of credit to in Anton Richardson. So I'm not going to be upset that Richardson's gone. He's on the Braves now. I'm going to hope that Juan Soto hasn't forgotten what he's learned and is going to lean into this relationship with a guy that he already knows.
Yeah, those 10 games, man, that is nerve-wracking, okay? I really hope that there's no injuries. Today, Luis Angel Acuna got hit by a pitch on his forearm. He departed the game. He's playing in the Winter League. These things happen. Man, I just really hope there's no injuries, right? I know he's got that verbal agreement with Steve Cohen, and that's cool, and that's
I'm going to hope
great,
that's
but
fake.
man, that makes me nervous.
I hope that whole part of this is fake. Let's hope that's fake news. He never plays a game for them. He can go hang out in their dugout.
That sounds good.
That's going to bring us to the end of this segment. Justin, you want to give us that promo that we've got lined up for today?
Oh, yes. Yes, we got a promo today. This episode is brought to you by Nagustag Oysters. Listeners, have you ever looked at your backyard and thought, wow, this would be the perfect place for someone to show up and start chucking oysters like a seafood superhero? Good news. Keith from Nagustag Oysters is exactly that superhero. Cape? Optional. Shirt? Optional. Fresh oysters? Mandatory. Shells flying everywhere? Also mandatory. Keith and his team will roll right up to your private backyard party and turn it into a 5-star coastal experience without you having even to pretend you know anything about oysters besides they taste good. Because you're one of the elite, the chosen, the podcast listener legends, you mentioned Meet the Mets Fans podcast, and you get 10% off a private booking. That's right, 10% off. That's practically like free oysters, depending on how bad you are at math. So if you want to have your party go from, yeah, this is nice, to who invited the oyster guy? Call Nagutag Oysters. Nagutag Oysters. Cold water taste, warm water state of mind.
And Justin, Nagutag Oysters, they're great, super fresh. But you could be somebody that our listeners are like, wow, this guy talks about Nagutag Oysters a lot. I think there's a reason for it. I heard a rumor that you have been out on the oyster farm with Keith recently.
Yeah, this morning, actually. Right, I was out there at 7:30 this morning, freezing cold, raining. I don't know what I was thinking signing up for this. No, I'm just kidding. No, I was out there, though. I was working the farm. Right, I had the waders on in about chest level water, freezing. My hands turned like beet red. I think a little frostbitten, right? By the end of it, I'm in the water. It's like 40 degrees at this point. Him and we're essentially trying to pick up these oysters, right? That are in cages, that are in these huge bags, and we're trying to sort through them. It was kind of crazy, but it was kind of cool, man. And I got to give it up for Keith, right? I know that he's a promo for us. By the way, it is not paid. He's out there. He's working. And so if you're looking for those oysters, right, Keith is your guy, right? No doubt.
Super fresh. Justin picked them up this morning, right out of the Great South Bay. All right, so we are going to go to our next segment now. We thought it was important that there's some things happening, some buzz happening around Citi Field about this new casino that our owner, Steve Cohen, is really, really invested in trying to make happen. And Justin did a lot of research about the casino. I'm sure all Met fans are thinking to themselves, like, how much of an impact does this casino have on us as Met fans? And so, Justin, tell us what you learned.
Yeah, well, first off, right, we talked on an earlier episode about the New York Mets losing about $350 million this past year, and the New York Mets have not been profitable for Steve Cohen. And so when we're talking about this venture, right, I think what we really are referring to is that this hopefully is going to offset some of the losses that the Mets are accruing for Steve Cohen. And so essentially, just to give you guys a little background of what's happening right now, there's currently 3 licensures that New York State is issuing in terms of casinos. There's also 3 proposals that are left. There had been a lot more. They've all dropped out at this point. And Steve Cohen and Hard Rock are one of those proposals that are still active. It's called the Metropolitan Park. And essentially what New York State is now deciding is whether or not they're going to now issue those licenses. There, as I mentioned before, there's 3 of them. New York State can issue all 3. That's possible. They also could issue 2. or 1 or 0 at this point. And so it's not a full guarantee that Steve Cohen and Hard Rock are going to get this proposal, but it is something that's going to directly impact the New York Mets. And we bring it up because where this Metropolitan Park is going to be constructed is right in our backyard. We're talking about in the parking lot of Citi Field is where Steve Cohen and Hard Rock are about to construct this $8 billion proposal. Now, this proposal is including 25 acres of public park, various entertainment venues, hotels, restaurants, and of course the casino, right? That is the big draw. That is the big get. That's kind of going on right now. So where we're at right now with this entirety of this thing is that there's final proposals that are due by December 1st of 2025. You know, they're talking about by the end of this year of 2025 doing or potentially issuing these licensures. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition and whether or not they get selected for this. You know, where Steve Cohen is at right now currently is the city of New York. Obviously, New York City and the community have already passed the proposal. The last hurdle that they have to now get to is going to be New York State. And so we are now waiting for the state to make a decision on whether or not those casinos, and really we only care about Steve Cohen and the New York Mets and how it's going to impact them, and whether or not this is going to come to fruition.
Yeah, I think that when we think as Met fans about how this is going to feel for us, some of the things that have popped up in talking to Met fans and talking to people who live in this general area, there are concerns around crime, traffic, congestion. And one of the things that's important to note is that Steve Cohen and Hard Rock are able to fund this, right? Like the city of New York is not shelling out any money to make this happen, as far as I understand it. This is all coming from them. And while there is the potential for some of these negative things to take place, the hope is that this is a huge attraction for us as New Yorkers, as Met fans. When you go to a Met game, you now have the opportunity to make it much more than just going to the ballpark, right? There's going to be a public park that's out there. There's going to be things that are out there that are for free use at any point in time. That's not just open when Met games are open. They're open all year and they're free to use, like the public parks that are going to be built on this land. That's really important stuff. As a Met fan, I'm talking to my wife about this the other day, and I'm like, hey, this is going to happen. It's super cool. That's my opinion. My wife was like, that sounds terrible for us trying to get to the ballpark. Where are we going to park? How are we? Like, if they're building this in the parking lot, how's this going to happen? And that's where I think this conversation kind of started for me. It was like, where are we going to park? How is it going to work? Is there going to be no parking while Met games are happening and construction is taking place on this new facility?
Yeah, I can tell you that there is a stadium in the middle of the Bronx, right? And if the New York Yankees can figure out how to park in the Bronx, I think that Steve Cohen and the Hard Rock Casino can figure out additional parking lots or, you know, ventures for people to actually be able to park. But, you know, this proposal, it's not just the park. It's also including upgrades to Metropolitan Point, right? Which is obviously the train station that we have over there, talking about the MTA, you know, them getting a huge revenue boost from this. And so I think obviously those are definitely concerns that they're going to have. It's going to be the first thing that they're going to address. If you're building and constructing in the parking lot, you're going to have to start constructing those parking garages for the fans for this upcoming season or whenever it is that they hit ground.
Yeah, you know, the Mets have done this before. When Citi Field was being built, it was being built in the parking lot of Shea Stadium. And I remember being much younger and going to these games and there being this whole thing of like, take the shuttle bus to Shea, because you would park all the way at the Flushing Meadows Park parking lot. And then they had buses that would bus you over to the stadium, or you could walk along the large like boardwalk thing that was there. It was a little bit of a walk, but definitely doable. And it sounds like the Mets have a plan. They could obviously do that, but it sounds like they're also going to be constructing these parking towers for people to park in as this project is happening. So the parking may shift from time to time over the course of the project, but hopefully it's not a huge negative while this facility is being built.
Yeah, you know, obviously I think it only can benefit the Mets, right? You know, I obviously we don't live in the city. We don't live in Queens, but we are huge Met fans, right? And we care about how this might impact our team. And when you think about like facilities, or when you think about attractions, right? You got like the ballpark in Arlington, right? It's not just a ballpark. It's an entertainment center that people go to, and it's an attraction. And we saw that the New York Mets were, you know, drawing over 3 million fans this past year. We obviously had a down year coming up. And so I think that what the Mets should do and they should be focused on is how can we get more fans in the stands, rooting on this team, seeing this product that the New York Mets produce. And I think it's only going to be a positive thing. I really do. I'm excited for it. I really hope it goes into effect.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things we hope to do is to bring the voice of Met fans about their opinions on this topic, if and when that approval happens from New York State. So we want to hear from Met fans. We're going to go out and try to get Met fans some sound bites that we can air right here on the pod for all of you guys to hear about how Met fans are truly feeling. Justin and I obviously gave our opinions on how we think this is going to benefit us. I think we're both in favor of it, but of course there's going to be fans that are not in favor of this, and it'd be important to hear why. Justin, that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. Great having you on again. I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, man. We're definitely looking for more hosts or people to pop on. Okay, and so if you are interested, make sure you DM right on Instagram or any type of social media platform that you see. Send us a text, send us an email, do whatever it is that you got to do to get onto this podcast. I guarantee you're going to laugh, you're going to have a good time, and it's definitely what the fans want to hear.
Yeah, it's a super cool experience building this out. And Pinman did it with me. That's not somebody that's a personal friend of mine. That obviously the first couple of episodes were friends, family members, and that's how we're building this thing. But Pinman was our first real fan that came on here, helped to create this episode alongside me. We planned it together. It was a great experience for me, a great experience for him. If you haven't seen that yet, check out episode 4 of Meet the Mets Fans, Meet Pinman. And that can be you, right? We want to hear your stories as well. And that's it. We're going to wrap it up there. Let's follow, subscribe to Meet the Mets Fans. I recently learned yesterday that I can post an entire episode on TikTok, so that's a platform you can check this out on.
Let's go.
Full episode 4 is on TikTok.
We're going to be trending on TikTok. I guarantee that.
We'll see what happens. Also, YouTube, you can watch the full episode on Spotify. You can watch or listen to the full episode, and you can get it anywhere that you get your podcast from. If you like us, please share this to your friends that are Met fans. We're trying to get this thing out there and hear from as many Met fans on the pod as possible. Let's go Mets. Yeah, let's go Mets.
Meet the fans, meet the fans. Meet the Mets fans, voices rising up from the stands. Hear their cheers, hear their groans, feel their highs, feel their moans. Stories untold now on the mic. Mets fans unite.